The PlayStation definitely has an interesting allure when it comes to horror games. While we have the heavy hitters with the likes of Resident Evil and Silent Hill, there were many other titles out there that definitely were interesting to say the least. They all have their own distinctive qualities and elements, while some may not like them, but there are others that did find them unique, me being one of them. But what I liked about this era of games, and especially with horror games, is that they were experimental. Yes, they were never perfect, and I don't think they were ever truly meant to be, but the fact is that they presented interesting qualities about them and quirky nature that appeals to different dynamics, but they also led the way for the future of games development. A lot of the games that we see today and the ideas and concepts that we now see are based off of the quirkiness of a lot of these older games, so they do stand out in that regard. And there's a lot of games that were released like this on the PlayStation. I have covered a lot of them previously in other videos, which I will leave a link to a playlist in the description, but there's even more that I've yet to try and play and even discover, which I do plan to do over the next while, as the PlayStation has such a diverse catalogue of interesting and quirky games, and even the ones that aren't considered that good, they're still worth a try at least. But with that being said, one of these interesting games that we'll be looking at here is simply known as The Note, that was published by Sunsoft for the PlayStation in 1997, originally in Japan, but would later be added in the European region later that year. Funnily enough, the game never got a release in North America, and the game is set in that year of 1997, where you play as a young freelance journalist by the name of Akira, who focuses more on occult journalism, where he researches dark and deep lore around many different elements surrounding the likes of hauntings and old houses and so forth. But the premise of the game sees him being visited by a woman whose daughter left for a trip with her friends but never returned. So he agrees to go and look for the daughter to try and find her, which leads him to some rural part of Europe, leading to an old rundown mansion. And honestly, where have we seen that before? It always seems to be a common premise with these games, but there's a reason behind that. And what he finds as he enters the building is that it is also home to very dark and dangerous spirits and even other monsters. So as the game progresses, you find out that a lot of people that ventured into this mansion never returned alive. And the game plays from a first person perspective, but it has some interesting qualities around it because it is dark, it is atmospheric, although I will admit one of the things that kind of lets it down is, right, the voice acting is very cheap and cheesy, a lot of B-movie style acting, very similar to games of this style. The music doesn't really complement the atmospheric nature of it, because essentially it is supposed to be a horror game, but the music doesn't suit it at all, because it's very more poppy and it doesn't really align itself with the characteristics of a horror game, which is kind of weird. But what's interesting as well, because it plays from a first person perspective, it puts you through the eyes of the character yourself as you're exploring all of the environments, trying to look for clues as to the disappearance of the young girl and her friends. But you also have to contend with loads of other monsters, spirits. You have to solve puzzles, find items of interest in order to unlock the many hidden doors and rooms, find hidden secrets, find underground passages. There's loads of areas to explore. But you'll find that when you do take damage, which you will end up doing, you'll find that your eyes, because you blink like as if you were blinking for real, and the more damage you take, your eyes start to blink a lot more, to a point that you can almost, that your eyes will close and that you can't really see anything that's going on. So that also adds an element of scarcity but also terror to it as well, which I think, right, probably at the time didn't go down as well with regards to the game's reviews, which it didn't get reviewed all that well. It wasn't positively received at all, and a lot of the issues were with the gameplay controls, the clunkiness, which it is a clunky game to control. A lot of these earlier first person horror games generally were back in the day, but they still set the foundations for everything that was to come after it. Like when you see the flood of games that you now see in the indie market today, it's just insane, and a lot of them would have taken their inspiration from games like this. But even regarding the damage elements, yeah, it can be tricky, because eventually obviously you can nearly go kind of blind to a degree because you can't see anything. But the one thing to note is that in many cases some of the enemies will attack you once there's darkness in the room, because you can't see what's hitting you. So what you have to do is you have to find items like matches or a lighter, and you have to light up candles that are in the room or old lamps, and this in turn will allow you to see the environments. But what happens is as well is that a lot of the enemies won't attack you once there's light in the area, so it does somewhat give you some sort of safety net to avoid confrontation, if you will. Now it doesn't always happen, not all of the enemies will have that same aspect, but some of them will, depending on the environments that you end up in. But there is a lot of interesting quirks to it. Like there was a lot of these games, and even more so released in Japan, that had a lot of similar qualities. This tries to do more of the same but add in a few of its own original ideas, and yeah, they're interesting, let's just put it that way, while they may not have worked maybe as well, and a lot of it is down to the limitations of the PlayStation controls back in the day, but they are interesting. And in many cases a lot of the quirks that you see in this game, you haven't seen them even in the modern day, you don't see them anymore. That's what I love about the console, is the experimental ideas that you see. Not all of them would be useful, but they were willing to give them a try, though were willing to take that leap and just try something different. And yes, they're not the best games in the world, but they're still worth playing in my book. Like, even when I go back, my first experience with this was, funnily enough, through a magazine article that I read way back in late 96, early 1997. And I remember reading about it, but there was no recollection of a release date. It was stated that the game would release at some point, but it never really gave an official release date as such. But I remember looking at it and being really interested by it, because of the fact is, with it being a horror game, and sure, anything that for me was like horror related back then, I was all in on it. I at least wanted to experience them. But it wouldn't be until years later, when I started getting back into collecting games myself, that I managed to hunt down a copy of this on eBay. Now, I will admit it was expensive. I paid at the time, and this is at least 10 or 15 years ago. I still have the copy here at home today as I'm recording this video, and I remember spending at least €50 on it, which, considering it, was cheap when you look at the landscape of the way games are now. Like, if you were to sell this now, or even look for prices in this, it'd be well over €100, if not more, probably even 3 times more that price, because games like this now, the prices of them, because they're so rare, and this game is very, very rare. Because that's what I say, like, when I look back, I remember even going to like game stores, and I used to travel up to Dublin on the train, and I would usually go to many of the games shops to try and look for games like this, and this was one of those games that you could never find. No matter where you went, you just couldn't find it. So the fact is that I managed to hunt it down on eBay and find it for the price that I did. And yes, it was expensive, but I was like, right, I bought it and I played it. Now, it wasn't what I expected. Obviously, when you're going back to looking at magazines, I did find it clunky, and I found it tricky to understand, and it does take a while to get into the game, but the acting is bad. Let's just put it that way. And I think the music really doesn't help it, but there is very interesting qualities behind it. Not the most fleshed out game out there, in fairness, but at the same time, there are certain gameplay mechanics and certain ideas that are definitely worth experiencing, because you won't see them in any other horror game. But like I said, this game was developed during a time when games were experimental. While they weren't always considered as the best, but they did try new things, and they were willing to try different things. And I think that's what makes them so appealing. But because of their rarity, they are often hard to find. So if you manage to get a copy of it, let's just put it this way, you will pay a pretty penny for it. Or the other alternative will be to try and play it through emulation, if you can do that as well. But those experiences, I'll leave that up to you. But aside from what I think of it, I would love to know your thoughts on this, and what did you think of it overall? Is this something that you played back in the day? Is it something you enjoyed, or did you not enjoy it? It will be interesting to hear your stories of this and what you think of it overall, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around more interesting, quirky and unusual games like this that were also released on the PlayStation, then leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and you can also check out this playlist to see other games in action that I have covered previously on the channel. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.